few legendary creatures have the mysterious appeal of the vampire. And that may be one reason why more than 5,000 Americans self-identify as vampires. According to tradition, vampires consume blood to live forever. Now, recent sightings of an alleged 300-year-old vampire named Jacques Saint-Germain have surfaced in New Orleans, reigniting claims that consuming blood is the key. Is it possible that one person could live for centuries and is walking the streets of New Orleans today? A young writer named Vince called me for help with this mystery. Vincent? But there's one thing about Vince.
My name is Vincent Curiel. I'm a writer, a blogger, and I'm a vampire.
When I discovered the vampire world, I found a place where I belonged. I'm one of the youngest, and with my blog, one of the loudest voices in the community right now.
I want to get to the bottom of this Jacques Saint-Germain myth. I want to know if this legendary New Orleans vampire really did crack the code to immortality.
I have to admit that I have never met a vampire before.
Well, it's not exactly what everybody thinks it is. Probably expecting things like this.
Dracula.
I am Dracula.
These celluloid abstractions, this is not what we are. We don't turn into bats. We don't turn into mists. You know, only the crazy ones sleep in coffins. It's a way of looking at life through a different lens, a more primal lens. It's living life without fear.
So Vince is a bit of a trip, wears all black and a set of fangs, but he also seems very earnest.
When you have the fangs on, you just feel different. It's a more primal aspect that comes out of you.
So how can I help you?
I want to find New Orleans' most famous vampire, Jacques Saint-Germain. The story that I'm told is that he somehow found a way to achieve immortality using human blood.
I've never seen anything scientifically that would lead me to believe that.
They're running medical tests in mice, transplanting blood from younger mice to older mice, and the older mice are becoming healthier. They just discovered a species of jellyfish that doesn't appear to age. So maybe immortality as an idea, as a concept, really isn't that far off.
Do you think that he is still alive? Do you think he's here in New Orleans?
In a city like this, anything is possible. I've even heard locals here in New Orleans that claim to have seen him face to face.
Recent accounts, not older people.
Absolutely. This is why I need your help with this.
Do I believe it's possible that Jacques Saint-Germain cracked the code to aging and that he's possibly still alive? I don't think so, but there's been so many accounts of him being seen that we have to look into it, if not to just disprove it. And apparently there is a speakeasy here in New Orleans that is just for vampires. So we're gonna go there and I'm gonna meet some vampires in person. Vince says a key figure in the community here may be able to help us. I've seen my share of supposedly secret places, but nothing quite like this. This place is incredible.
Yeah, it is. We're here to meet a man named Cedric. He's a paranormal investigator. He's also very well known within the vampire subculture here. How are you?
Good.
So this is Jen. She wanted to ask you some questions about the vampire community.
Cedric's not an agent.
If anyone can help us track down Saint Germain, it's Cedric.
I've been a paranormal investigator for over 20 years. Hunted all across the country. And here in the city of New Orleans, the vampire stories and legends you're gonna hear in the city are gonna sound fantastical, they're gonna sound weird. But every story has a kernel of truth in it somewhere.
I'm gonna ask what's probably on everybody's minds. Do you guys drink blood? Is that a sort of thing that vampires do?
That is actually a very small portion of the vampire subculture in the vampire world, because it can be so dangerous. So what you have is vampires that we feed off energy. And it's not obtrusive. It happens more at things like sporting events, being in the French Quarter. You're feeding off of that excess energy that every living thing puts off.
But But I think we all know the person that we have in our lives who feeds off that negative energy. We refer to them as emotional vampires.
Emotional vampires.
Is that a thing as well?
That is very much a thing. There is an ethics to how we feed, to what we do.
What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions that lay people have about your community?
That the sun kills us. That didn't come about till 1922, thanks to Hollywood.
The sun kills me, but it's because I'm a redhead.
Exactly.
So what do you know about Jacques Saint-Germain?
Well, Rose,
I was actually going to ask you that to sort of run me through the things. I'm familiar with aspects of the story, but
I can take you to the house where the attack happened.
Do you know anything about Jacques Saint-Germain?
Jacques Saint-Germain. We know this gentleman was here. We know that he threw the most lavish parties. People talked about it. He had the finest food. He had the finest wines. And then the incident happened the night with the young lady who jumped off of the second floor yelling, "He's a vampire, he's a vampire, he's trying to kill me." And then Jacques disappears.
I'm struck by how well known this story is within New Orleans and within the lore of the city. The good thing about Cedric is he understands New Orleans. He lives here. He has connections. He can access other parts of New Orleans that I cannot as an outsider. So I'm hoping that his expertise will help us find some answers.
I have some leads here in the city of some individuals who believe that they ran into Jacques Saint-Germain. Are we dealing with a vampiric entity? Are we dealing with an alchemist that was able to find the elixir of life and who has figured out a way to live forever?
So I met this woman named Rose. She says that she can take us to one of the houses where the Jacques Saint-Germain incident actually happened.
Well, Cedric said that he actually knows a guy who thinks that he saw Jacques Saint-Germain himself just a few years ago.
If we could speak to a witness, that could really point us in the right direction.
The fact that so many people are coming forward and saying that they saw this man who supposedly died years and years ago, Jacques Saint-Germain, it's unsettling. I want to know, who are they seeing? What are the circumstances? And why do they believe that it's him?
So I met this woman named Rose.
Self-proclaimed vampire Vincent Curiel is seeking to confirm recent sightings of a man reported to be a 300-year-old vampire. According to New Orleans legend, Jacques Saint-Germain vanished after attacking a woman in 1904. I'm struck by how well known this story is within New Orleans and within the lore of the city. And there's also an element of appreciation to the story, as odd as that sounds, because this almost ended in an attempted murder. Does this man actually exist? And could he really be using blood to extend his life?
That's it. That's the Jacques Saint-Germain house.
Rose Sinister is a historian with a deep knowledge of New Orleans. She also knows a thing or two about the city's vampires.
I love the history of New Orleans, and I love sharing that with people. We're never done learning about this mythology. That is what I wanted to talk to you about. It was at this location in 1904. All of these neighbors up and down the street, they get woken up early in the morning to the awful sound of a woman screaming and glass shattering. There's this naked woman covered in blood on the gallery right there. She is screaming for help. He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me. And at the police station, she tells the officers that she's a prostitute. And the man in that house, she only knew him as Jacques. He'd hired her, taken her upstairs to his bedroom. So somebody realizes that she's talking about Jacques Saint-Germain, and that's the game changer. This is a big deal. Jacques Saint-Germain, he's that strange fellow who lives all alone, and he throws these amazing parties. Like, people come from all over to attend his parties. They don't know anything about him. This is the South. This is a big deal to be a stranger in the South. They just describe him as a short, impeccably dressed guy in his early 50s.
I think that Rose has a very specific point of view because she's theatric, she's great in what she does, but I have to take facts as facts, so I need to do some more investigation. Where did all of his money come from?
No one knows, to this day.
He was multilingual.
He spoke multiple languages, English, French, German. He could speak fluently about philosophy. He could talk about geometry. He could talk about ancient Rome, ancient Greece. This is one of the earliest stories that we have of the modern vampire.
Did the police ever find him? Did they search his property?
They did search the house. As they cross the threshold and step inside, they quickly realize that he's gone. They don't find any food in the pantry, but what they do find, a wine collection. At least that's what they think at first. The officers, they start packing up these bottles of wine, and then one of them gets knocked over. Whatever it is that starts to ooze, it has a sludgy, congealed, almost granular viscosity to it. This has led many people to wonder who Jacques Saint-Germain was really. The fact that his parties were always at night, the fact that they were such expensive parties, the fact that he spoke so many languages, was so educated, reminds a lot of people of another Saint-Germain, the Count of Saint-Germain, an 18th century French alchemist who was a frequent guest at Versailles in the 1700s. But he was 2 centuries prior to all of this. Some people think they're the same person.
As gruesome and bizarre as the story is, I can't dismiss it, especially in a city with New Orleans with such a rich and varied history. Weird stuff happens here, more than what would happen in another city. What are your thoughts on Cedric and the people he hangs out with? Credible people?
Absolutely. I think he's the best at what he does.
Cedric has located a person who claims to have seen Jacques Saint-Germain recently. Maybe we can get some information that will lead us directly to the man himself, if he exists.
How are you guys doing today?
Good, how are you?
Well, I was able to make contact with Loam, and he's willing to talk to you. Hey, Loam. This is Jen. This is the lady I was telling about, the investigator.
Hi. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. I know that what you have to say is probably something you don't tell everybody.
Well, it's certainly extraordinary.
Loam started here in the city as basically what we affectionately call gutter punks. They're trained kids. They ride the rails. And some of the gutter punks had reported seeing a gentleman that wasn't quite right. He was very, very educated, but he didn't have a problem hanging out with these trained kids.
So when you met this gentleman that you later thought was Jacques Saint-Germain, what were the circumstances surrounding that?
I was hanging out with a bunch of other traveler kids. I was like a teenager. This was probably about 2004. The cool thing about the French Quarter is that you can kind of just hang out and the world comes to you. He just kind of like floated around. I know I saw him a few times in Jackson Square, again, like hanging out with travelers, and he never sat. That was like the weird thing, is he always just kind of stood there and hovered.
What were his physical characteristics?
Older, like late 40s, early 50s tops, but he like had the air of someone who was like in their 80s or 90s, just that sort of like I've seen it all, done it all kind of feel.
Really? That's interesting.
He was a short man, dressed to the nines. Sometimes he wore a trench coat.
You know, he had a really nice tie chain and everything. Even your typical gentleman nowadays does not dress that well.
Was he pale, tanned, olive skin?
Very pale. He seemed like he just didn't go out in the sun very often. Some of his stories always struck me as being like antiquated. Specifically, I remember like him talking about like having lived in Egypt.
But a long time ago, before airplanes.
Traveling in a caravan or riding a camel, not the kind of thing you would hear about in modern times. He would come and hang out and try to invite certain girls back to his place.
Like a predatory sort of?
Very much so, very predatory. He was like a really well-to-do creep. My entire take on it was that he was just really lonely.
Loam's story was certainly interesting, and I have to agree with him that an older man who's seemingly very well educated, has a lot of money, is hanging out with a bunch of street kids. It's very suspicious behavior.
Very much struck me as someone who was like maybe trying to pay for sex, like that same vibe.
And did any of them come to you later and say, this is what happened, he tried this, any?
There was a girl who actually went home with him. They'd been like drinking wine together, and he just got really creepy. She got uncomfortable and just kind of left.
I'm assuming that in 2005 you didn't realize right away that this was the person that you believed you saw. How long did it take?
No clue. I was actually speaking to my friend about it. We started talking about it, and he's like, well, that fits the description of this guy, Jacques Saint Germain. And so I did some of my own research online and looked up a few things, and I was like, well, it's like awfully uncanny that he just like fit the description, his behavior, like everything was consistent.
Loam said the man he saw would speak about Egypt as if he lived there hundreds of years ago. It's all very weird.
Do you not believe him, his story?
I don't know, and it's been 15 years. That's a long time for a memory to linger.
I know this all seems fantastical to Jen, but I think there's something more here.
When I was talking to Cedric at the Speakeasy, he talked about the different groups of vampires and he brought up sanguines, but it seemed as if it was a very taboo subject. Vampires who actually drink blood.
A lot of people are not too keen to speak about the fact that they might drink blood. If they don't drink human blood, they feel physically ill, they'll feel lethargic, they'll get migraines. There are some that even claim that they won't be able to go out in sunlight.
Do you happen to know anyone personally who engages in this?
I do personally practice sanguine feeding.
Vampires who actually drink blood. Do you happen to know anyone personally who engages in this?
I do personally practice sanguine feeding. For me, it's a highly sacred and ritualized practice. It's not blooding myself. It's usually a very small amount, and it's between me and a person who I have a very close and personal bond with.
Do you have safety concerns when you engage in that practice?
Oh, absolutely. Just coming off the heels of the HIV generation, there are huge risks of taking part in this practice. Every person who participates in sanguine feeding always has to get their donor rigorously tested for any bloodborne pathogens. You always have to make sure that you and the consenting partner are kept safe in every way.
So you think that it's more common now than it was in the past, or less common?
I think it's less common now because most people prefer to avoid it and would rather just feed through metaphysical means. Feeding from a person's energy without making physical contact.
When you engage in this practice, is it for medicinal purposes or is it for intimacy? What is your reasoning?
It forms a sort of bond between the donor and that vampire. We're feeding off of the energy, the vital life force that the person produces. And many of us feel that the best and most direct way to do that is to draw and consume the blood of that person.
Is it safe to say nobody wants to feed on 85-year-old Aunt Marge?
Usually, yeah.
Loam's claim that the man he saw seemed to come from an earlier time is intriguing. We need to learn more about the Count Saint Germain from the 1700s, and I have a lead that could help us.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, we are looking for Marita.
Oh, let me go get her.
Sure. You in the market for some shrunken heads? So that's Jacques Saint Germain.
Hi, I'm Marita.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. Marita Crandall is an author of A Vampire History. I'm wondering if she can shed any light on whether the two Saint Germains are actually the same man.
So during the course of your research and everything that you found, do you believe that the French Saint Germain and the New Orleans Saint Germain could be the same person?
I mean, it would be really amazing if he was, and I sure would like him to be. It's possible. There really is this amazing person going through the centuries as Saint Germain.
What are some of the things that you know about the Count?
Count Saint Germain was an actual person, definitely. There are letters and reports from famous people that have mentioned him in history.
In the 1700s?
Yes, so this is Rowski, a Transylvanian prince who was thought to be his father. He was under a lot of scrutiny at the time and very much danger, and he thought his son was going to be murdered, so he actually is said to have given his son to the Medici family. That would explain a lot of his training in music, poetry, sculpting, everything.
Are you aware of anyone, historical figures, that can say that they knew him personally, they could document his existence?
Yes, absolutely. Madame Pompadour, who was King Louis XV's mistress, and then also Voltaire. He really enjoyed his company. So he was very charming.
Now, what were some of the reasons that people thought that the Count was hundreds of years old? What were the reasons behind the purported extreme longevity?
He never looked a day over 50, even when he was supposed to be much older. Nobody knows what that age actually was. He was never seen eating. His assistant that he had said that he would give little pieces of information to people, and he would let them go with it. I'll give you this. You can live longer. Watch what I do. So that's where like the real story comes in with who he might have been. His life started with secrecy, being given to, we think, the Medici family. So he learned how to lie at a young age to hide who he really was. And that's part of that leads to the legend that comes to New Orleans, is, you know, what really did happen to him.
Could the Count have lived for hundreds of years by consuming blood? After hearing about sanguine feeding practices, I need to look at the facts. Is there any case documented anywhere in the world of extreme longevity, supernatural abilities, anything tied to consuming blood? So I tracked down a phlebotomist, a medical professional trained to draw blood for transfusions and clinical tests. Jennifer Kosh has participated in several blood studies, and I'm hoping she can reveal if there are any medicinal benefits to the consumption of blood. We've been investigating a figure named Count Saint Germain. Now, he is a legendary vampire. According to legend, he used blood as a way to extend his life. Jennifer, have there ever been any real-life cases of people consuming blood that would actually prolong their lives?
Well, we've always been fascinated with blood, and back in the 1700s, there's a gentleman known as Paul Burt who actually invented something called parabiosis. He basically took two rats, a younger rat and an older rat, he sliced them and sewed them together. The blood from the younger rat actually ended up having benefits to the older, so the older had better cognitive function, was able to go through a maze faster. However, the younger mouse ended up slowing down and wasn't able to maneuver through a maze.
And they were connected through the circulatory system.
Correct. So basically when they were sewn together, the capillaries actually joined together, and so they essentially had one circulatory system.
And the benefits were still there when he separated them?
And the benefits were still there, correct.
Wow.
So nowadays, we're using something called platelet-rich plasma. They're taking your blood, and they spin it down in a centrifuge. They take the plasma and then inject it back into the person. So like for athletes, if they have a knee injury or something like that, they end up injecting the plasma back into that area that was affected, and they found that they're recovering faster.
But do any of these processes actually lead to longevity? Is it possible that Count Saint Germain or any of us could find a way to extend life? Is it possible that alleged vampire Jacques Saint Germain found a way to extend his life? According to phlebotomist Jennifer Kosh, advances in blood research are providing medical benefits. But do any of these processes actually lead to longevity?
While we're on the cusp of discovering stuff, there's no real empirical evidence that states that we can actually prolong our lives.
So going back to Count Saint Germain, is it at all possible that he could have stumbled upon procedures like this centuries before anyone else?
It's possible he could have stumbled upon the knowledge. However, because of the time period he was in, the science and the technology was not there. If he somehow managed to do that, there's no way for him to bring that plasma and introduce it back into his system.
So even if Count Saint Germain understood the benefits of blood, there was no technology at that time to allow him to get the blood back into his system, except by consuming it. So that's my next question. Can you get any benefit from drinking blood? Now, there is a subgroup of vampires called sanguines who believe that there is a medicinal benefit to ingesting blood. What are your thoughts on that?
There's a thing called clinical vampirism. It's also known as Reinfeldt syndrome. If you've read Dracula, it's Dracula's apprentice. He used to grab rats and eat them and take their blood because he wanted nourishment.
Rats found. Millions of them.
After people have been into an accident and have an altered mental status, they somehow, for some reason, crave blood.
So this self-perceived craving for human blood could be triggered by trauma?
It could be triggered by trauma, or it's just a placebo for some reason. People enjoy it, which I still don't understand. The body is not meant to ingest blood. You could lead to an iron overdose, which is known as hematomacrosis, and that's really bad for you. It could lead to fatal heart attacks, anaphylactic shock, so I would highly recommend not doing any of that.
It's really fascinating that science is actually looking at ways to use blood to turn back the effects of aging. However, proving that Count Saint-Germain figured this out and made it to New Orleans requires real evidence.
I ran by the local library and I managed to collect some documents that I feel might lead us in the right direction. I'm hoping that these documents that I've collected can prove that Jacques Saint-Germain may very well have existed.
Hey, stranger.
How are you?
What'd you find at the library?
Got this. Census reports.
Census reports, all right. Oh my. Where's the year of the census? 1890. So they gave you a buffer when they looked for it.
Yeah.
It's the railway postal clerks. That's just somebody's employment, correct?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. J.A. Saint-Germain. He was employed there 1901, so that lines up with the time frame.
The incident happened, what, 1904?
He definitely did exist.
Isn't that something?
Good librarian is worth her weight in gold.
That's true.
This helps us paint an actual timeline of the real Jacques Saint-Germain, not a legend, the living, breathing man.
So we got a manifest, census report. As I'm flipping through the documents, I'm seeing the person that we're looking for. I have employment verification, I have census information, and I'm seeing a manifest from the SS Californian showing that it brought him from France in 1890. So on paper, it looks like this could possibly be the person that we're looking for.
I really do think there's something here. This legendary vampire really did crack the code to immortality.
One of the documents says he was an engineer, the passenger manifest, and then if you look at the Railway Mail Service employment record, you know, I look at this employment record from the railway, and even if he was an engineer, this just doesn't seem like a job that a socialite would have. That's not a lucrative job, working for the railway. It just doesn't seem like something that would fit the image he's made for himself.
You're right. Wealthy, talented, cultured, sophisticated. I really don't know what to make of this.
And then here in the white pages type document, in 1919 he's listed as Saint-Germain J, Assistant Director, Military League, American Red Cross, Gulf Division. Do you think this is the same person?
It very well could be. I mean, well, hey, he could have been traveling with the Red Cross too.
1919 he shows up, but that's a long time after the incident.
We don't know where Saint-Germain's money came from. All these odd jobs could have been a cover or even a distraction.
Yeah. But after the incident, he wasn't seen for years, supposedly.
At least not around here.
Do you have the ship manifest?
Yeah, this one.
1890. Rose told us he arrived a year or two before the incident, because remember, everybody was thinking there's somebody new in town, here's this guy. If it's 1890 when he arrives, he's not gonna be the new guy in town by 1902 or 1903. He's gonna be old hat at that point. So we know a Jacques Saint-Germain was in New Orleans at the time of the alleged incident of the woman on the balcony. But the dates of these various documents are a good 15 years on either side of this incident.
The ship's manifest from France is really the most compelling document. Jen's right about the date being a bit early, but it's possible that he could have just stayed in the shadows after he arrived. And then maybe he just joined the socialite scene after his confidence grew. We have to think outside the normal paradigm on this.
After meeting so many self-professed vampires, I'm left wondering, what drives someone to join that community? I've tracked down Dr. Joseph Laycock, a professor at Texas State University, who's researched modern vampires and written a book about them. Dr. Laycock, hi, thank you so much for making time for me. Why do you believe that people are so fascinated by vampires?
I think as society has changed with modernity, people feel themselves alienated and confused and like they don't really quite fit in. And so where the vampire used to be something that was terrifying and evil, they now see a bit of themselves in this figure. So it's become a sympathetic figure over time.
There are people who drink blood believing that it's beneficial to them. Did your research reveal why they do this?
A lot of the so-called sanguinarian vampires who are actually drinking blood say that this is part of their health practice, that they need to do this to feel well. As to why, I have no idea, whether it's entirely psychosomatic and is a placebo effect. I don't know anyone who has openly claimed to have extended their life. I have met people who have said that they look much younger than they ought to.
I'm in the French Quarter, and I'm about to meet with somebody who claims that they've met Jacques Saint Germain recently. Balthazar.
Hey, Vince. How
Great to finally meet you.
Good to finally meet you. Most people call me Czar. I'm the resident sanguinary vampire. There are more than 275 years of stories about various vampiric acts going on in the city of New Orleans. And New Orleans is only 300 years old.
I understand that you had a run-in with Jacques Saint Germain.
You can call it a run-in. It was an incredibly foggy night, just after thunderstorms. Walking up through the quarter to go to my car, I happened to notice this gentleman leaning on a light pole. Dude's wearing a hat, trench coat, kind of short, 5'4", 5'5". As I got up to him, he asked me for a light. I stopped and gave him a light. Took a couple of hits off his cigarette, said it's a nice night for Jack. When I registered what he said, I turned around to look, and he was already gone.
What does that mean exactly?
Jacques Saint Germain threw parties during inclement weather. I have a theory that Jacques was actually Count Saint Germain.
So you believe they're the same person?
Yeah. Live as long as somebody like the Count Saint Germain did.
I actually believe that as well.
You no doubt are familiar with the stories of Jacques Saint Germain and Count Saint Germain. Do you give the existence of Jacques Saint Germain any credence?
I think Jacques Saint Germain is currently in the status of an urban legend. By that, I mean there is documentation for the story that should exist. We haven't found it yet.
Is there any actual proof that vampires may have existed at one point in time?
To my knowledge, there's no evidence that true vampires with supernatural powers ever existed. And we should bear in mind, historians are not trained to study the supernatural, so we don't know exactly what evidence we would even be looking for. There is certainly evidence, though, that ancient people feared the idea that the dead could return and attack the living. And so there is plenty of archaeological evidence of desecrated corpses to keep vampires at bay.
So Dr. Laycock, if vampires are indeed a myth, where did it spring from?
The origins of this legend are not known, but they're quite possibly very ancient. Vampires draw together a folklore from Greece, from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from Turkey, and all these different sort of nocturnal creatures and blood drinkers contribute to what modern people call the vampire.
It turns out New Orleans isn't the only city with vampire activity. In fact, the leader of a Los Angeles clan has personally fanged more than 18,000 people. I'm at a private vampire gathering to find the godfather of the modern vampire movement, Father Sebastian.
Happy solstice!
Father Sebastian has written several books on vampires and apparently has inside knowledge on the mystery we're tracking down. He invited me to speak with him tomorrow about Jacques Saint Germain.
vampires. Here we go.
Father Sebastian, the master fangsmith of the Saber-Tooth Vampire Clan, has offered to share his secrets of Jacques Saint Germain.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Now, you are a vampire historian, so you're very well read and you've researched a lot of this. What do you know about Count Saint Germain?
Count Saint Germain is an actual flesh and blood human being that had many traits of what people would identify as a vampire, but could be explained by other things. Longevity, great charisma. He was a violinist, a composer, an amazing author, as well as the darling of many courts.
Now, given what you've read and researched, do you think that there's anything legitimate to the theory that he did, in fact, find an elixir of life, something for greater longevity than what we know today?
There are two possibilities. One, as a con man, he had a master and apprentice relationship with young men that would basically take on his title, and he would retire. So maybe over a period of 100 years, he would have 3 or 4 imposters that would be chosen, kind of like a vampire choosing his children. The other possibility is he was a vampire.
The rumors of his longevity have led some people to believe that he lived on into the 20th century in New Orleans under a different name, Jacques Saint Germain.
My theory is that there was a man who found the diary or found the legend of Count Saint Germain, went to New Orleans under an assumed identity, and maybe had a little bit of a blood fetish and a little bit of money to be able to throw around to impress the socialite community.
I'm having a hard time believing that the man we know as Jacques Saint Germain, as told by the tour guides, that people talk about in the French Quarter, that this man actually existed.
I think what's most important is to look at the legend. The legend does exist. Do we know if he existed or not? I don't think it matters.
So, what have we found? First, I want to talk about these two guys, Count Saint Germain and Jacques Saint Germain. So I think we've established that Count Saint Germain was definitely a person. There's several notable people in history who talked about him. Voltaire, Louis XV, Casanova, Madame Pompadour. These were people who saw him in the flesh and spent time with him. He was a composer, a musician, multilingual, an alchemist, but most of all, he was considered a brilliant storyteller. So what evidence do we really have that Count Saint Germain was a vampire?
Well, he seems to have more talents than one can gather in at least one lifetime. There's a lot of people that say they never saw him eat or drink anything. Most of all, he never seemed to age.
I think the talents and education can be brought back to the fact that he was raised in the Medici family. His education was top-notch. As far as never aging, I have to think it's just because he took really good care of himself. I mean, you know people, I know people, they don't go out in the sun, they hydrate constantly, they watch what they eat, they exercise.
Right.
You can delay the natural aging process doing things like that. So it's hard to find proof that he was a vampire. Now, Jacques Saint Germain, let's talk about him. So why did people think that he was a vampire?
Well, there was the incident of the woman that he attacked, jumped out his second-story window, and everyone says that she was screaming that she was being attacked by a vampire.
The woman on the balcony.
Well, there was a report of the police accounts. They found wine bottles full of blood in his house.
Right. Wine, bottles / blood.
He seemed very educated and spoke multiple languages, just like the Count did.
You know, I certainly see how people could make the connection because there are many similarities. But I want to talk about the woman on the balcony. Where were the police reports that this happened? Where were the media accounts? Where was she after the fact? I mean, if this happened to me and I thought somebody was a vampire and they were trying to kill me, I would certainly come out and talk about it.
With all his wealth, he could have made her disappear himself.
That's a great point, and we have seen that throughout history, wealthy people making problems go away.
Right.
When you look at Count Saint Germain, there's a lot of evidence that proves that he actually lived. But when you look at Jacques Saint Germain, it seems just so sketchy. We do have that one ship manifest, but even that doesn't fit the timeline.
So I gather that you don't quite believe that the Count Saint Germain cracked the code to immortality and could have become Jacques Saint Germain.
Well, there's no evidence that consuming blood will extend your life.
But here's the thing. It appears the Count always had apprentices.
He taught them how to be him. Not just what he knew, but his stories and his habits.
That would explain why he never aged. There was always a younger version of him around the corner.
Just like all of his apprentices who carried on his story, recently someone in New Orleans added a twist and created Jacques Saint-Germain. So just like that, the Count became Jacques.
I get that. Count Saint-Germain really is immortal.
And Vince, no matter what you or I do, no matter how many hoaxes we uncover or how many witnesses we talk to that have absolutely nothing to back it up, it won't matter because a legend has been created. The legendary vampire of New Orleans, the real elixir of life. It's just a great story.